So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name is Elaine Popoulias. I'm Executive Director of the Center for European Studies, and it's truly an honor and a pleasure to welcome you and our distinguished guests here to address a topic that we have been thinking about and talking about sort of on the periphery of various discussions at the center over the last year and semester, but really have come together to look at the issue today in a much deeper way. I want to thank the Center Periphery Study Group and Sebastian Royo for really being the force behind putting this session together today. It's a topic that I know Sebastian has been thinking about for quite a long time, and we're really very grateful, Sebastian, for all your work in putting it together. So we're running a little bit behind. I will turn the proceedings over to the capable hands of our chair, Professor Pons.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks a lot for coming and attending this exciting panel. We have three great panelists, and we're going to spend 15 minutes. I'm going to give 15 minutes to each of them for preliminary comments, and then I'm going to open the floor for questions and answers. But let me say a few words. So first, Joaquin Almunia. Joaquin is a former Spanish Minister of Employment from 1982 to 1986, then Public Administration. He was the leader of the PSOE and then went on to have a brilliant career in the European Commission. He was the European Commissioner for Competition and the Vice President of the European Commission from 2010 to 2014, and prior to this, the European Commissioner for Economic and Monetary Affairs. So he's going to open the presentation. On my right, Georgios Kaminis, who after brilliant studies in Athens, but also in Paris, went on to go with a very successful academic career at the University of Athens School of Law, then became the Assistant Greek Ombudsman responsible for human rights and Greek Ombudsman from 2003 to 2010. He was elected the mayor of Athens in 2010, and he has been the mayor of Athens since early January 2011. Thank you very much for being here. And on my left, Stowamir Sierakowski, who is a Polish sociologist and political commentator. Stowamir is the founder and the leader of the Political Critique, which is the biggest Eastern European movement of liberal intellectuals, artists, and activists. He runs a number of newspapers. He has contributed to newspapers in Eastern Europe, but also to newspapers in the US. Thank you very much for your presence. So, Joaquin, the floor is all yours. Okay. I know that you have a presentation, so you have 15 minutes. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody. Thank you very much, of course, to the Center for European Studies for hosting me again for this panel and these discussions on the left in Europe. I would like to show you a presentation regarding the Spanish perspective of the left situation and the challenges, the problems also, with some comments at the end regarding the European-wide landscape of social democrats in particular. So first of all, the electoral results in Spain during the last years. The Socialist Party, PSOE, my party, won elections in 2004 with 42.6% of the votes, and 2008, 43.9% of the votes. Very good results. And those who are on the left of the Socialist Party, Izquierda Unida, post-communists, got in these years 5% in 2004 and 3.8% in 2008. So the left, the two main parties of the left, received almost 50% of the votes. But this was before the crisis. The crisis exploded, the financial crisis exploded in 2008, as you know, and in the elections that took place in 2011, in November 2011, if I remember well, the Popular Party, the center-right party, the Conservative Party, got 44.6% of the votes and also an absolute majority in parliament, whereas the left, PSOE, went down until 28.8%, the post-communist Izquierda Unida 6.9%. So the left, the two main parties of the left, lost during these less than 4 years 12 percentage points, and the Socialist Party, the governing party until 2011, lost 15 points. The management of the crisis is there, of course. The new elections took place in December 2015. The Popular Party, the right, won again, but lost 16 percentage points because a new party, new center party, Ciudadanos, got more than 10% of the votes. PSOE received only 22% of the votes, so with a clear loss of votes in these 4 years. Izquierda Unida, the post-communist, 3.7%, lost half of the votes they got. And the new party, the new leftist party, Podemos, emerged with 20.7% of the votes. Half of the Podemos votes came from the left, more or less, and half of the Podemos votes came from new voters, young people or voters that didn't went to the polls in the previous elections. With these results, nobody had a majority in the parliament, and the leader of the Socialist Party at that time, Sanchez, tried to reach an agreement, an alternative majority, with Ciudadanos and with Podemos. But Podemos made impossible a PSOE-Ciudadanos government, and this led to new elections that took place in June last year. The Popular Party, Conservatives, won again with 33% of the votes, slightly improving the previous result, but far from the results they got in 2011. Podemos absorbed the post-communists, but its results stalled at 21.1%, and PSOE also got a similar result than some months ago with 22.7% of the votes. Right now, with these results, the Popular Party continues to lead the minority government. Why the PSOE lost so many votes, so many political support during these years of crisis? Because, in my view, the negative results of its economic and social policies during the crisis, extremely high unemployment that reached 26%, now is around 18% of the active population. Not only a lot of jobs were lost, but wages had decreased, and working conditions are much worse now than before the crisis for many people. Fiscal austerity is a clear reason for the loss of votes of those who were in government. First, the PSOE, and since November 2011, the Popular Party, the Conservatives, and increased inequalities, not only because of the crisis, because this process started before the crisis, but inequalities had grown during the crisis, both with a left government, the PSOE government, and with a Popular Party government. So the voters are suffering, they are upset, they are angry, and they don't find a lot of differences between the economic policies and the social results of the government policies, whereas Social Democrats are in government or the Conservatives are in government. But also in the case of PSOE, we need to take into account political mistakes. The PSOE is seen by the young people, but not only by the young people, also by urban voters, as a party coming from the establishment. And this creates mistrust against both big government parties, the PP from the right and the PSOE from the left. The Prime Minister of the last governments of PSOE, Rodríguez Zapatero, was obliged to adopt serious adjustment measures, but he was not able to explain why these these austerity policies were needed. And Zapatero was not candidate in 2011. We had a new candidate. This new candidate, after the bad results of 2011, was forced to resign. A new leadership took place, and this new leader is no more the leader of the PSOE, and now we are trying to find a new leader in May, before our next Congress in June. So weak leadership, lack of explanation of the policies adopted when we were in government, mistrust vis-à-vis an establishment that is composed not only by the right but also by the Social Democrats, and bad results of economic policies in terms of social welfare. But the left, not only the PSOE, the left in Spain has problems. The electorate of the left has diminished since 2008. In 2008, the left has obtained almost 50% of the votes. Now it's more closer to 40% than to 50%. It means that the majority in the parliament is not at the reach of the left. The center-right can continue to have support for a minority government there. Historically, before the crisis and before 2004, the socialist governments from the period of Felipe González as president, but also in the first period of Zapatero, received the support of nationalists, Catalan nationalists and Basque nationalists, that were center parties at that time playing the game within the constitutional limits, within the constitutional rules, and within the constitutional system. Now this situation is no more true in Catalonia, so the nationalists in Catalonia became independentists, reject the constitution, reject the constitutional system, and they are not anymore possible partners for the left in government. So, for instance, the former leader of the party, of the Socialist Party, Sanchez, when he tried to get support to organize an alternative coalition, a progressive coalition, alternative to the PP, was not able to reach support from the independentists, because you cannot be in government in Spain with some parties, some leaders that wants to split Spain into two or into more pieces. And although the Popular Party lost its absolute majority in 2015, there is no viable alternative right now to a center-right government. And the left is divided, not only because of this new challenge coming from the independentist forces, but the left, PSOE and Podemos, are divided into two blocks that do not add up. Social Democrats are one thing, and left populists are another thing, in particular to share a government. You can share opposition policies, you can share opposition platforms, but if you want to become a government, it's not difficult, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to share the ideas of these left populists. The PSOE is a party of government, and Podemos is a protest party. It's an alternative party that is not thinking in reaching the power unless all the power is in their hands. And on top of this, PSOE is a federalist party, so we want to develop the present Estado de las Autonomías, regional state in Spain, towards a clear-cut federal state, federally organized, whereas Podemos is not independentist, or they are not independentist, but they are, I don't know if the word exists in English, sovereignist. So they believe that every region in Spain has sovereignty to decide if they want to become another country, a different state, or to stay in Spain, and this is not possible to be accepted by a national party, as is the case of the PSOE. Some words regarding European social democracy. We have a crisis, of course, not only in Spain. But the question is if this crisis is cyclical or is structural. We will recover and we will disappear. My points on this, and I will go very quickly to those points. Social democrats in Europe, we are suffering a loss of identity because the expansion of the middle classes is blurring the split between the working class, that were our traditional voters, and the other parts of the society, the bourgeois. This is no more the way we can analyze the structure of our society, and the social democrats are suffering from these difficulties to give a new interpretation to a new society. Second point, there is a lack of consistency between the economic policies that when we are in government we are obliged to develop and the economic policies that we include in our electoral platforms. What we promise to the voters before the elections cannot be delivered if we are in government. We need to change. And this is very difficult because the lack of trust comes partially, at least, from this asymmetry between the promises, the electoral promises, and the realities of the results when we are in government. The social democrats in Europe, to some extent, we became conservatives because we want to preserve the achievements of the past, the achievements of the welfare states we built in Europe in the 60s and the 70s in the democratic countries of Europe, and since the beginning of the democracy in Spain or in Portugal or in other countries and young democracies. And these achievements of the past that are, in many occasions, our first flag, are now shared by other political forces that are not social democrats. So the blurring between the different identities and the different platforms creates difficulties for us. At the same time, we have difficulties to embrace changes and to define strategies for the future, viable strategies for the future, for a different society with a lot of changes and fast changes. We have to face a dilemma, how to be in government to really change things and not appear at the same time as part of the establishment, how to be efficient, how to be competent when we are in government, and at the same time not to be confused with the traditional members of the establishment, and the voters are disoriented with this. We need to rebuild an alliance between the left behind by globalization, by technological change, by unemployment levels, and the progressive members of the society that are not, as was the case in the past, identified in a strong political and cultural coalition with their representatives of the weakest sectors of the society. And finally, we need to modernize the way we are in politics, the kind of political parties we organize, the kind of political action we are able to develop. We need to change practices, and we need to change the way we connect with every citizen, not only during electoral campaigns, but between two different elections. So finally, the way forward, because there is a way forward, of course. The progressive political space, part of the society that wants not only freedoms and democracy, but also social change, reduce inequalities, offer better opportunities for the weakest part of our society, social protection for the left behind. This political space exists, of course, in our societies, will not vanish in the future, but the old society and the old ideologies used to deal and to present attractive political platforms to this part of the society will not come back. So we need to find alternatives. And the question is if the social democrats, the old social democrats, in my party was founded in 1879, if I remember well. So we are not young as a party. But to what extent we will be the political force that will be able to connect with this new society and to build and to offer new ideas. And we have competition in this area, because this political space exists, will not vanish, but there are populists that wants to address messages and to get votes from this space. And in some European countries, they are successful, not only in Spain with these 20% of votes of Podemos, but also in many European countries from the right, from the extreme right populism. They are also getting votes from these parts of the society that were traditionally the social and electoral base of social democracy. We have center-left liberals, modern, that wants also to get support from this political space. We have now in France one very good example. Emmanuel Macron was member of the Hollande government, was cooperating with the President of the Republic that is a socialist and with prime ministers that were socialists, but he will not define himself as a social democrat or a socialist. He will define his own political platform as neither a rightist platform nor a leftist platform. He tries to be modern, escaping from the traditional cleavages of the old politics. There are also in some countries post-communists. In Spain they have been absorbed by Podemos, but in other countries they still exist, of course. There are parties with one goal platform, Greens or other kinds of one goal platform parties. And finally, of course, there is still the social democracy, but to look forward and to be successful in the future, social democracy needs to be revamped. And we in Spain, and I conclude with this, we have some experience of this. We were an old party, not only now in 2017, we were a very old party in 1977 when the first democratic election took place in Spain after the dictatorship of Franco. And we were the old party with very young people, with very young and modern platforms, and we got a fantastic success. And 2 or 3 years before that elections, the number of members of my party were no more than 4,000, and more than half of them were living outside of Spain, in exile, or they were migrants. So this is possible. The question is how to do it. Thank you.
Georgios, what's your take on the future of the left in Europe?
Thank you. Am I being heard? It's okay. Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me to take part to this symposium, which I think is dealing with a rather pertinent question, and not only for Europe. For economy of time, please allow me to state 7 basic principles to which I think a European left should be committed. I will then talk about how, at the city of Athens, my team and I, we have tried to put these principles into practice during my 2 terms as mayor. I will use as examples our policy in 3 sectors: social care, civil society, and the refugee issue. I will try to speak about, on the field of applied, let's say, politics. I start with my 7 articles of faith, as I call them. First, I believe in Europe because I embrace the fundamental values upon which the EU is based, namely democracy and the rule of law. And of course, democracy should not be limited to the state level, but rather it should also extend to the European level. When I say more Europe, I mean a European Union in which the main institutions enjoy a high degree of democratic legitimacy. Second, I strongly believe in the European project, and I want my country to be part of the hardcore of the countries that comprise the European Union. Many countries, and especially a small country like Greece, would not be able to survive the harsh global competition outside the EU umbrella. Even Germany is a middle-sized country by global standards. The challenges posed by globalization today can only be tackled effectively either by large states, such as United States of America or China, or by intergovernmental entities or union of states. Third, historically, capitalism has proved to be the most capable in producing wealth and in increasing the size of the pie. Economic growth cannot be achieved outside of the capitalist system. What is at stake now is first, how the pie will be allocated in a just way. And secondly, how, alongside the traditional business model, we can also develop forms of social entrepreneurship by engaging also public-private partnerships. This is at the core of our policy agenda. 4, we all know that the advent of nationalist populism over the past several years in Europe and elsewhere is largely a consequence of the deepening social inequalities caused by the force of unregulated markets. But we also all know that it makes no sense to condemn globalization. From a modern left perspective, we must support the establishment of a set of rules of law binding for everybody, including large multinationals, and also we should support the establishment of regulatory mechanisms of regional and intergovernmental nature. Only in such instances can we effectively take on the role of regulating globalized markets and constitute structures of progressive global governance. 5, following a model of progressive global governance, its goal will not only be to support efforts by countries to reduce inequalities domestically, but also to decisively promote development in those nations from which there are large numbers of people who migrate to developed countries. Because we must admit that nationalist populism is not only a consequence of deepening social inequalities, it is also fed by the fear that has overcome many people in developed countries, namely that uncontrolled migration will increase unemployment and threaten national identity. This means that the politics of open borders that the radical left advocates actually foments deeper nationalism. Migration flows must be controlled, and on the other hand, Europe and other democratic countries of the world must keep their borders open for refugees. 6, when it comes to foreigners, migrants and refugees, the left's politics must aim at their full social integration, but also what one could call their constitutional integration. By the latter, I mean that refugees and migrants who decide to live in an EU country must fully respect the fundamental norms of democracy and the rule of law. It is in this way that we can conceive of a cohesive community with the same core principles and values. Such a community can form the common ideological background, the unifying sense of belonging, which can counter both liberal individualism and multicultural fragmentation. 7, I believe that the future belongs to cities. In the past few decades, cities display unprecedented dynamism, which attracts high levels of human and economic resources. At the same time, cities are also the places where we witness the consequences of the most important contemporary problems with great intensity: crime, uncontrolled inflow of migrants, environmental degradation, poverty, and social marginalization. Large urban centers constitute contemporary social laboratories, where the answers and solutions to the major challenges are researched and put into practice. Knowledge and innovation are produced in the universities and research centers of these cities. Art foundations that promote culture are also found in these cities. And it is in these cities that tolerance, freedom, and innovation, and all those elements that attract youth, prevail and can flourish. Things happen in cities. Thus, the future belongs to cities, and the left is the political force with a historical duty to harness this dynamism and the innovative forms of action that flourish in large urban centers. The EU has recently taken some steps towards recognizing the new role of the cities as entities closest to the citizens, speaking about the urban agenda. At present, I'm in the middle of my second term as mayor of Athens. I was elected for the first time in November 2010 and was re-elected in May 2014. When I took office, the economic crisis had already set in Greece. From the very beginning, we had to handle the rapid increase in the number of people in need. The magnitude of the crisis and the rapid decline of the city's revenues have pushed us to form a social policy that makes full use of the available resources and potential of society, of its well-off members, non-profit foundations, and reliable NGOs. The municipality thus makes full use of its own resources, human and other, where those of society are not sufficient. The municipality primarily takes on a coordinating and strategic role. It designs the programs by identifying where the needs and priorities lie. It certifies agencies and assesses their operations. It engages in fundraising from EU programs as well as from private and public agencies. At the same time, the municipality cooperates with private and public entities implementing programs on social innovation, entrepreneurship, and education. And because we believe that the greatest investment that we can make in our country at present is in our human capital, especially among the youth, the City of Athens organizes afternoon classes in public schools for students who need help and support with their schoolwork. In these classes, high school teachers volunteer to provide lessons to students who come from low-income families. The municipality also organizes, again in public schools and in poor neighborhoods, during afternoon hours, educational and sport programs for students and their parents. At the same time, with funding from private donations, the Athens municipality is implementing a program that we call Designed for Better Learning. A basic premise of this program is that we can have an impact on the educational process and improve learning and teaching through architectural interventions in schools and by showing students that they can play a part in shaping their physical environment. The municipality has set up a makerspace where teachers and students go to make objects of their own design for use in the classroom. Design for Better Learning is implemented under the technical supervision of the Architectural School of the University of Crete, and we are looking for an international education or research institution to evaluate the results. I would also like to mention that Athens recognized the role of civil society and has dynamically embraced citizens' initiatives in its decision-making process. In times of austerity, we wanted to create a systematic mechanism that collects the available capacity of public-spirited citizens to co-create new innovative solutions for a better life in the city. So we created Synathina, an online platform to engage members of the community in problem solving and reform. Individual citizens and community groups can submit volunteer activities as well as innovative ideas on how to improve their city. The platform connects citizens who have good ideas to the people and organizations that can make them a reality. It harnesses the creativity of citizens and the momentum of their ideas to change city government for the better. It is a common space dedicated to civil society. It brings forward the voices of the various community groups of the city and helps activities of engaged citizens to be publicly recognized. Around 3,000 activities and more of 300 community groups have been connected to this platform so far. Along with this Synathina platform, we are inviting citizens to participate and contribute to urban planning in the context of a mechanism called Urban Lab that the municipality has set up. What is needed here is to connect the city services as closely as possible with these groups so that they learn from each other and can act jointly, while respecting, of course, their distinctive roles. This kind of contact the city has established with civil society, I believe, reestablishes a degree of trust between citizens and public institutions and thereby contributes to reintegrating citizens into the political process. A basic precondition for a political system like the Greek one to regain the trust of citizens is to prove that it works with transparency in all its functions. For this reason, we have put the municipality's budget execution online, which allows Athenians to follow revenues and expenses in real time. We have also established a non-profit organization, the Athens Partnership, that facilitates high-impact public-private partnerships on behalf of Athenians. We have structured the Athens Partnership with a fiscal sponsor, a 500Y1C3, public charity-based, here in the United States, that manages donations in a transparent way. A second precondition for regaining citizens' trust was to rationalize and reform the municipality's budget. During my first term, we reformed the budget so as to rationalize resources, cutting back on unnecessary spending. As a result, from my first year in office, we swiftly turned the municipal budget deficit into a surplus. This allowed us to progressively reduce local taxes, especially those that businesses have to pay, so that we could restrain further job losses. Our next step will be the participatory budget. A certain number of the projects that are carried out by the municipality and which are of direct interest to the city's neighborhoods will be decided by the residents through participation in the decision-making processes of the municipality's annual budget and by participating eventually in the possible fundraising. Over the last 2 years, though, we have been confronted with a crisis within the crisis. I refer here to the refugee issue and the large inflows of refugees and undocumented migrants who since the summer of 2015 started arriving in Greece from Turkey. In this thorny matter, the city of Athens promptly mobilized, leading by example. It was the first city in the country that provided municipal land to establish the first refugee site. Since then, the municipality of Athens actively participates in housing refugees in apartments in the city. It also participates in important social integration programs, which is an extremely difficult task as the refugees are called on to integrate in a country in which, for a variety of reasons, they do not wish to remain. In the European plane, Athens was a pioneer with the establishment of what we call solidarity cities in Europe. In this initiative, some of Europe's largest cities, such as Madrid, Amsterdam, Gdansk, Strasbourg, Barcelona, and others, committed to accept a certain number of refugees from Athens. The fact that these large cities and capitals of Europe have shown the way to solidarity in an area that has caused much disagreement and turmoil among the EU's member states, in my opinion, carries high symbolic and political meaning. My conclusion thus would be that in Europe of crisis, and in a country that constitutes the weakest link of the chain, A progressive management should obey to principles that stem from a strong political will to be inclusive, just, effective, and open to synergies. Thank you.
Okay. It's good now? Okay. My idea was to speak more universally about the left in Europe or in the world. Also in the United States, probably we'll do it in the discussion, but I will follow the example of Joaquin and Georgios and present you the Eastern European or Polish, but not only Polish. We have many things in common perspective here. If you look at this region, the post-communist region, you have more the division, not the left or right, but right or wrong. That means that, well, actually, this region is really very conservative, and it also pertains to the side that tries to balance populists. It's conservative both in economy, in cultural issues, when it comes to refugees, European integration. Almost everything is here much more conservative than in the West. CDU in Poland would be perceived as a radical left. I mean, but okay, there are two reasons, or like there are many reasons, but two are pretty obvious. One is that communism, we had for 7 years or 6 years communism, which stole the language of the left. If I would say even in 2000 here, social class or social consciousness, the language that is absolutely normal for any sociologist here at Harvard. In Poland, it would be a scandal. So one thing was that communism comprised the language of the left and generally the leftist tradition here. The second is that 1989, you remember, was the apogee of belief in neoliberalism. It's actually the year when Francis Fukuyama published the article and then the book, The End of History. And we were, you know, the most we perceived communism as an evil empire, the more we wanted to have a capitalism in this region, and we were strongly focused on the West. We wanted to be as a 50th state of United States, actually. And if you look at the intellectuals from this moment, like Anthony Giddens, who wrote a book Beyond the Left or Right, Jürgen Habermas also wanted to turn from leftist perspective more to the liberal perspective. And many, many others, David Held as well. Former dissidents that were left-wing in 70s or even at the beginning of 80s turned to or wanted to be just liberal or just normal because the neoliberalism attributed the status of normality, common sense, and so on. So this region was more neoliberal than any other region probably in the Western world or European-focused world. So, and also like the idea of open society and the closed society, if you look at it, it's an idea actually, again, right or wrong, not necessarily left or right. And what happens and why this idea is not necessarily democratic. I'm a big friend of George Soros. My organization is supported. I visited him 2 days ago, so I'm not his enemy. But I used to have an argument with him about the idea or this division, because actually it's not equally legitimate division. As long as you're not going to tell me who will vote for closed society consciously, I wouldn't agree that it's a really it gives you any choice, like the real choice, okay? And actually it works also as self-fulfilling prophecy, because what we had after 1989 in each of those countries, you had like open society elites versus anybody who would disagree and who would immediately be irrational. No matter if it's a feminist or a communist or just anybody who would disagree with this Washington consensus at that moment, or just transition as a model of catching up with the West, would be a closed society member. And one day, those elites of open society, whom I identify myself as a roundtable elites, actually we called it Spanish way, so that's mostly or like just a peaceful way of transition from authoritarian to democratic regime. But one day they had to, as any politician, make a mistake. And if you have this division, open society versus closed society, one day closed society will come to power. And this is exactly what happened in all those countries. Mečiar, Klaus, Orban, Kaczynski. They after this neoliberal revolution, they appeared as a counter-liberal, populist counter-revolution, actually. So this is one thing. Another thing is liberalism, because actually, if you look closely, populists attack not necessarily democracy, but liberalism, okay? They don't want independent, they can win democratic elections, so they not necessarily are against democracy. What they are against of is the independent media, the separation of power, independent courts, and so on. This belongs to the liberal tradition, not necessarily to the democratic tradition, okay? So this is why they say, I want to have a liberal democracy, not just like autocracy or something else. And any actually defense of constitutional court or independent media or courts, they perceive as attack on the majority because they were elected by majority. So this attack on democracy, this is how they explain it to the people. We are attacked, we were democratically elected, so we represent the people because we represent democracy. And again, look at this region. If you want to have liberal democracy, first of all, you need to have liberals. And we didn't have many liberals in 1989. The liberal tradition in Poland or in any other country is quite weak. It's a very Anglo-Saxon tradition. It's not necessarily Eastern European tradition. And you can quite easily impose democracy, like just organize, fair election. But it's not easy to impose liberalism because it's about values, it's about like attitudes, it's about, it's a kind of a thing that comes with the tradition, not with the procedures. It's much less procedural, okay? Actually, there is a nice example of hypothetical, or an anecdote by John Holbrook, who after the war in Yugoslavia said, imagine that in a society full of fascists, chauvinists, xenophobia, you impose democratic election. Who's gonna win it? Will you have liberal democracy out of it? Will you, at the end of the day, have really democracy? So it tells you something about the specific of this region. And then I would let me make two or at least one point about that is more universal, because we are sharing some universal problems of the left, of course. One is that we live in a world where economy is globalized, but not politics is globalized. Even we, Joaquin is talking about Spain, Georgios is talking about Greece. I was forced to talk about Poland or Eastern European region, but this is how it works. And look what happens when economy is globalized and politics is not globalized. Your country, if you are like financial minister of a prime minister, is less and less sovereign economically. What dictates you mostly, or your choice in economy when it comes to taxes or any other significant decisions, are rating agencies, financial markets, multinational corporations, and all the trials, all the probes of elevating the democracy on a higher supranational level is so hard as we see in European Union now. Actually, this center could be easily called the center of European disintegration, not European integration, because this is actually what is more appealing to the reality now. And if your government is less and less sovereign, actually, it is less and less credible. When I observed the election in America, actually Donald Trump, well, if I would attract to someone the notion of credibility, I would have attracted to Donald Trump. Not because I like him, but if Hillary Clinton entered the scene and says, I'm going to change America, I'm sorry, but I was not really, I wouldn't believe her, because he should do it for last 30 years. when Donald Trump came and said, I'm going to build a wall, I'm going to expel the Muslims and so on, I really thought that he really wants it, okay? So mainstream became unelectable, and populism became a mainstream, or became the only credible alternative, because the alternative was never more alternative between left and right, but mainstream and people who were contesting the mainstream that people perceived as less and less efficient, so less and less credible. Okay, this is what you have in all those Western countries. And actually, this is why globalization is a main enemy of all populists. This is why they focus not only on George Soros, but globalization as well. Fourth, my point would be to attract your attention to like 3 dilemmas of the left today that are, I think, very universal for us. So first is, what should we do when it comes to populists? And it's a real dilemma for left-wing party or left-wing movement. Should we be still a part of the mainstream, or should we oppose it, trying to balance both populists and the mainstream that people perceived as less and less like appealing to them or credible to them? Should we work with liberals, even no-liberals, defending our liberal democracy vis-a-vis populists or not? This is a tough dilemma, because actually, and this is the second dilemma, if you look at your potential electorate, again, popular class, you would like to represent being a left, but it's so conservative when it comes to cultural issues, okay? At least in my country, but I think everywhere. Like, look at the popular class in America. If you want to realize your program that refers to identity or cultural issues like LGBT or women, actually, I wouldn't believe that I come to Harvard, speak about the left in a panel that are only men represented. But actually, the richer classes are more liberal when it comes to identity or LGBT or feminist. So your electorate is like divided and more divided. And choosing one against another makes you not left, or like blurs your identity as a left-wing movement or a left-wing party. And the third dilemma, and my last point, would be what we should do with the party system. Because if the economy is globalized and the left and the state is not globalized, the party systems never really work. That doesn't really work efficiently. And this is why people are looking for the alternatives to party systems. This is why actually everywhere, even from the left side, people were looking who can we find that comes from outside. Sanders, Corbyn, even people like Macron or Schulz, they are successful, at least for now, because they presented themselves successfully that they come from outside. Schulz comes from Europe, not from the establishment. Of course, he is a part of establishment, like even Trump is a part of establishment. But they try to show themselves as someone who's coming out of the party arguments. Macron created something that is like an anti-party, didn't take part in primaries on the right side or in the left side. So again, the left should still stick to the party system and still create parties and take part in elections, or try to do something that would actually be more supranational, less belonging to the party system choice. Like Varoufakis is trying to organize European movement, and like, like European parties probably would be something that would be more appealing to the future. I'm giving you those 3 dilemmas, but of course I have my opinions about it, but I will leave it for the discussion. Thank you.
So to open the discussion, I will just ask one question to the panelists, and then I'll open it people in the public. So my question for the three of you is as follows. In all your primary interventions, I think you either referred or signaled a clear convergence between the left and the right, which is not an absolute convergence, but a certain convergence between the left and the right in a number of European countries, in which the left remains a bit more liberal culturally and socially, and the right a bit more liberal economically. Joaquin, you tried to explain this, and you mentioned that it's due to the left coming to power and exerting power and internalizing a number of constraints that come with exerting power, and also to the fact that a number of ideas from the left have permeated among right parties. Georgios, in the 7 beliefs that you emphasized, I think right-wing politician would agree, perhaps not with the 7 of them, but with a number of them. Obviously, and the emphasis on capitalism and the belief that capitalism is the right system, but on others as well, cutting back on deficit, etc. So I think the position you laid out on refugees is perhaps specific to the left, but you also, I think, signaled some convergence, and Stowamir, you also signaled the convergence between the left and the right, and you proposed perhaps one possible interpretation, which is the mismatch between the level at which the economy gets organized and the level at which politics take place, imposing a number of constraints on politics. So the question here, if indeed there is perhaps not a total, but a relative convergence between the left and the right, the question is as follows. Should we expect to see a new political divide in which the left-right traditional divide is substituted by a new divide between an open and a closed society, open and forces in favor of society open to immigration, open to globalization, versus forces that go back to the different countries. And if indeed we evolve towards this, if indeed there's perhaps actual coalitions that take place between the moderate left and the moderate right, a bit like in Germany there has been between the CDU and the SPD in some große Koalition, then what would be the place for the left? What would be the distinctive values of the left? And if we don't move towards this, is there some space for a third way for the left between the old social left Democrats and the new populist left?
Yes. Well, I don't know if it works. Yeah. Okay. What will happen, or what is going on between the left and the right? I remember the book by Tony Giddens that you mentioned, Beyond the Left and the Right. I think, as I said in my last slide of my presentation, the political space for progressive platforms, politics, and parties exists. The question is that the components, the elements of this space are not the same than 60 years ago. There are elements that were in the middle of the agenda that divided after the Second World War the left and the right that are no more there because achievement has been made, the right has embraced the positions of the left in many areas. So the elements of the agenda are different. If the political parties or the political families are not able to understand this, they become old. And now, with so many changes in our societies, in our world, the voters don't like old platforms, don't like nostalgic positions. Or they embrace populism, simple slogans and simple way to put forward the problems without spelling out the solutions, or they like something new that is consistent with the changes they are feeling, with the changes they are suffering in many cases, or with the changes they want to consolidate. So the agenda is the question. What is the agenda for the left now, for the modern left? Of course, sticking to democratic values. I don't think that the way out for the present left, for social democracy in Europe, is to embrace populism. This would be a big mistake. Or to want to be the more radicals in town is a big mistake. If you want to be in government, if you want to be electable, you cannot have as an aspiration to be the more radical guy in the electoral campaign. People will not support this. Voters will not support this. Elements of the new agenda, in my view, that require answers from the political point of view. Climate change is one, of course. And we see in this country now, but in many other countries also, that not everybody embraces and supports a real, serious and viable agenda to fight against climate change. Migration, of course, how to deal not only with refugees, that of course, but with migration in an aging continent that will need to accept the need to receive labor force from outside, unless we will renounce to growth and we will renounce to sustain our welfare state. We need to discuss this. And from the left, the position is not the same than from the right. And third element, to accept the need to advance towards supranational political platforms, organizations, and activities, or to give up to the old ideas of nationalism, protectionism, and all this. I think these are three elements, not all the elements. Of course, there are many others, but these are three elements that are new, that were not in the agenda of the traditional divide, left and right, 30 years ago.
Georgios, do you have an answer?
Well, it's a very difficult question. Anyway, I think that for the time being, right now, there is a clear-cut division. It's not between, let's say, right and left. It's between, you can call it the supporters of open society and closed society, populists and not populists. Because I think there is a very clear danger. There are some analogies, scholars have pointed out, between this period and the period between the two world wars. There is a rise of nationalism. There has been an economic crisis. And we see that the left was in decline then, as it has been now. We have seen that Mussolini and Hitler, they created their own career and they arrived to power, mainly using great part of the dictionary of the left and of the values of the left. And so that is a phenomenon that we see right now. We see that many guys from the right or from the left, they have, let's say, they have used, the arguments of the moderate left. The second thing is that we have to realize that these years after the Second World War till 70s or even 80s were an age of prosperity for Europe. And we had a social democracy that flourished. There is a tradition there that we have to understand very well, but of course renovate, because the challenges are new. The globalization challenges, and there is the big dilemma, because how are you going to apply a social policy in Europe protecting those that have been left behind by the globalization and be competitive in a globalized world? So in the global problems, we need global answers and global alliances and creating no instances that can regulate the markets, international instances. And one of them is the European Union. The second thing is that I don't think that the problem, people are conservative, and they don't like lesbians, they don't like, colored people, etc., etc. What people mostly don't like is political correctness, is to be conservative on protecting progressive ideas. I distinguish between the two. There is a space. Now, I have seen it in the municipality of Athens. I insisted on that. Okay, it's a particular case. We in Greece now in a deep crisis, but we managed to have a coalition from neoliberals to ex-communists, Euro-communists, winning twice the elections. Why? Because first of all, I think we tried to reintroduce morality into politics. We tried to keep our word. We were very consistent on that. That has always been a privilege, let's say, of a certain kind of left. And we have spoken very openly to the people, and what I have seen is that when we even defended, the rights of migrants or the rights of refugees, people did understand, but our discourse was not a highly ideological discourse. In those matters, you have to be very practical and show how these values that have always been values of the left must be applied in politics, because what you can really do with those is have a more peaceful and social, integrated common life in the city. I protect refugee rights by saying that, okay, we have those people here. What is the alternative? We have to do the best to integrate them and for everyone to live peacefully. So that is why we created the refugee site. That is why we participate in a renting apartments program, because I ask my Athenians, what do you do? Do you prefer to have them sleeping in the streets and in the public squares and in the parks? When you come to the city and to the problems of the city, you have extremely political problems, but you can find practical solutions, I think. That is the great lesson that I have learned from being a mayor. Thank you.
And I have a student in my class who is Greek, and we had a case on the refugee crisis, and he mentioned how his family has worked on the refugees indeed.
Oh, yes?
I can testify, with this personal anecdote. Stowamir.
But excuse me, you cannot explain very easily to the dwellers of your city, the citizens, that you will have, to find houses for the refugees and not for them. So that is a hard thing to do. So you must be very, very balanced on that.
Absolutely.
I disagree. I don't think
with
that...
what part?
Well, actually with both, my friends, and maybe with you as well, but I'm not sure what's your opinion.
I've remained cautious.
Okay. I don't think it's a problem of agenda. Well, what we should invent new, there is too much knowledge, too much information. The problem is how to select them, not how to produce them. I think there is a problem, well, except for maybe one thing, nationalism. Because this is the only idea that survived in the era of postmodernism. Everything else, every other ism is weakened, like unfortunately socialism as well, or it's not appealing to the people, or it's blurred, or something happened to it. But nationalism is really still with us. Maybe because globalization melted everything, and people wanted to have at least one thing that will stick to them as a stable direction, something that they wanted to owe for themselves that no one really will ever more change. It's probably the simple explanation, but look, like no matter what kind of economic model you like, Danish or British or American, populist parties are growing everywhere. It's not a question of economic model, unfortunately, because we on the left would like to think that because of neoliberalism, like, people, it created poverty, inequalities, polarization, and this is why we have populism. Unfortunately, you have bigger or smaller inequalities, and still there is no correlation. Or if there is, it's really very small. So it's a problem for sure with nationalism. And then there is a very ugly dilemma when it comes to refugees. The dilemma is like this. If you agree that they will come, you'll lose election, more or less. This is the problem. The problem is that if you implement or give a priority to the moral ideas, you will open the borders for them. But then you will lose election, populists will win, your liberal democracy will be endangered. So you will not have refugees, but you will also not have liberal democracy. So on your side is at least you can defend liberal democracy, because in both cases, no matter what you choose, you won't have refugees. Like in Poland, if Civic Platform, the party that was defeated by Kaczynski, would say, we're not going to take any refugee to Poland. Poland is not ready for this. It's a question of social coherence, administration, not only of morality, because it is, actually. Civic Platform probably will not lose election, and we will not have all those troubles, horrible things that we observe in Poland. So what do you choose? At least I would like to turn your attention to it, because this is the problem of contemporary politics. I'm not against refugees, but because, and actually I think that this is going to be the first, second, and third issue in future, because there are not millions, but hundreds of millions people around Europe that are much, much, much poorer, and they would like to come. They would like to come, and they will. So this is, and you know how, and you also cannot just you cannot just turn the blind eye to the fact that that there are fears in the society, because there are really populist, scared people. In Poland, 76% before 6 months before election were to help refugees. Now it's the opposite, unfortunately. So it's easy to scare people, but they are scared already. Of course, there are also other emotions in the society, like compassion, and you can base on it. And there are like some positive examples of how politics can handle with the mayor of Sopot, one small country in Poland, has asked Kaczynski government, because it's not Szydło government, it's really Kaczynski government, to invite 10 orphans from Aleppo, and the government rejected this idea. And then actually it created some kind of wave of moral support for Sopot and for this guy. So he showed an example how to deal with this, but it's not easy to do it really on the massive scale, and it's not easy to really make a difference this way. So maybe, and you know how people think. People think that maybe not every Muslim is a terrorist, but every terrorist is a Muslim. It's only true actually for a very short period of time, because if you if you extend your statistics to mid-70s, the amount of victims of ETA, of IRA, and of European, actually, people is much, much, much higher than the, like, Islam terrorists are like 5th place at most. And actually, almost all of them are raised here in Europe, not like outside. And people don't really think that refugees that are coming are victims of terrorism. Actually, even the same terrorists that endanger Europe and the United States. So they are stigmatized for the second time, being perceived as terrorists as well. The biggest number of Muslim terrorism are Muslims, you know. But people really don't calculate this way. So we should really, maybe we should change our narration on it, saying, yes, okay, Islam is a problem. We're not gonna tell you that it's not, okay? But we have here, and it's not Christian, it's not correct, it's not good to expel them, okay? But this is actually what it's hard to say on the left side, okay? I'm doing it for the discussion, okay? Because I don't want to be like just talking about morality and like good leftist values, okay? Because it's not gonna actually solve the problem. The thing is that and the last thing, populists have no shame. They have no scruples, okay? They don't hesitate, and we have scruples. If you look at Hillary Clinton, she was full of scruples, shame, and everything. It was actually much easier to provoke or like to push her than to provoke Trump, okay? And this is maybe what we should lose, okay? Maybe we should push more on realism in politics. Maybe we should have less scruples. This is why I don't think it's an agenda problem, that it's a problem of like being tough in the politics. Because they are tough on the other side. We shouldn't be as like them, but so we should work inside the law. This should be the only difference between us and populists, because they don't care about the law. We should care about the law, but we should be the same tough and less caring about how do we look, okay? Because they don't care. They always look bad.
Can I ask something? I have not very well understood what is the position of your movement on the refugee issue about Poland. Can you say it in a few words?
Of course. Like, I was probably the most pro-refugee political commentator in Poland, being one of the most hated in the same time by Kaczynski, of course. I really tried to do whatever it takes to explain to the people, telling them exactly the things that I told you, looking at statistics, trying to inform as much as is possible and promote as much as is possible all those like informations, like to do like Joaquin said in this presentation. The problem of Zapatero was that he not explained efficiently his politics. I don't think it's a problem. Like that usually when we can't do something, we say we just couldn't explain.
So what is your point?
So now my point is probably that we should re-evaluate our narration about it, because in any case you won't have them like more. That would be probably my point. That's what I told you. Compared to sentences.
No. In order to understand, I don't mean to be provocative.
No, be provocative. So, it's okay.
No. And well, Poland has certain obligations under the European Union law. And under the agreements, there is an obligation to receive a percentage of refugees.
7,000.
7,000. What do you say about this?
I would say we should.
No, what you should say. What are you saying?
I would say we should take them because we are part of the European Union. I would push this pro-European card because actually Polish society is the most Euro-enthusiastic society in Europe. 78% of polls are for European integration, not like in France, 40-something. The only moment when Kaczynski started to lose support was this summit in Brussels, because people got really scared that we can be out of Europe, okay? So I will push this thing. I would say, you want money from Europe, you want security, you don't want to be satellite of Russia, take 7,000 refugees and stop it, because we're not the first to do it, okay? We're not rich enough, we are not efficiently administrated enough, we have a problem with social cohesion, we are the most homogeneous country in Europe, so we don't know how to behave.
Greeks say the same thing.
No, I'm sorry, but they are winning, they're winning.
So, yeah, I think there's an agreement on this in all European countries. Let's open the debate to the room. I'm not sure we have yet a definitive answer to the future of the left, but we have clarified the question. The left has to, on my left, I don't have the mic. If the mic can circulate, yes. All right, please. Or let's have a woman, because no woman has spoken. Who was raising their hands? Sorry. Okay.
Only men.
Only men. Only men for now. Okay. So, sir.
Yes.
Yes, please.
Yes.
Please.
No.
Yeah.
This gentleman there.
Just next to you.
There is a lady there.
Okay, the lady.
Could you explain what you mean? Okay. Could you explain what you mean by the cultural feelings of the Polish people, or of anybody in Europe?
I didn't understand.
Cultural feelings, what do you mean?
Well, you said the cultural feelings were against having immigrants being liberal, quote unquote. But you didn't really explain what that meant in real terms, in terms of the actual sentiments they have.
Okay, so I give you the example, because I could tell you a lot about Polish conservatism. It's probably the largest tradition in the Polish intellectual history. And actually, it's the tradition that it's broken by Kaczynski, because Polish conservatives says, obey the law, respect your state, be a realist in foreign policy, okay? Respect the ownership. These are exactly the four things that Kaczynski is raping in Poland, okay? So this is why Kaczynski is more like populist or nationalist than conservatist, okay? People in the West used to perceive the other side to Kaczynski as probably more liberal, or not, it's more liberal, it is, but liberal or left-wing, like Tusk, for example. It's not. Tusk was a right-wing politician, his identity is right-wing, he would call himself, I'm a right-wing politician. He used to even say that he's conservative. Tusk as a leader, this is my example to you, couldn't for 7 years pass the bill about in vitro, even if in vitro was supported by 76% of society and 2 more parties. Even this was too risky because of the Catholic Church, because he was afraid of losing 2% that would allow Kaczynski to rule the Poland, okay? There is no sexual education in Poland. Polish law doesn't see gays. It's just they don't exist for Polish law. Okay, there's nothing about them. Of course, we give most of our funds when it comes to the culture goes to the Catholic Church institution. Catholic Church is not controlled by the state at all. We don't know how much money they have. They are state in the state. That is independent mostly. So we are much closer to countries like Russia, Belarus, Albania when it comes to those issues, LGBT, feminism. Only European Union is something that we are very, very pro, but also very selectively.
Sorry.
Thank you. Antonio Costapinto, University of Lisbon. I have 3 questions. One on Spain in terms of the role of Euroscepticism within the Spanish left. And the question is, it's an issue, it's a cleavage between the socialist and the Podemos, because in a way, we have other experiences of, let us say, cooperation between, for instance, I'm going to speak about Portugal, where the Portuguese equivalent of the Podemos decided for the first time, for instance, to support a socialist cabinet. But that's another. So is the European Union a central issue or it's a minor issue? For Greece, for our colleague that spoke about Greece, I have the classical question on the Syriza. Syriza is in power for a couple of years already. I know that you were not elected by Syriza. As a matter of fact, you were elected against Syriza, and or at least re-elected against Syriza. Anyhow, it's Syriza to be will probably be or not a stable, more or less stable equivalent of the former PASOK within the Greek party system, and on Central and Eastern Europe, more on Hungary than in Poland. You mentioned, and I like the concept. As you know, well, we academics, we invented a lot of concepts to let us say to define certain political regimes, semi-democracy, hybrid regimes. There are hundreds of pages about this. But for instance, in the case of Hungary, it seems to us, and it seems to me, that Hungary is going a bit further than just illiberal democracy, in the sense that the control of the media, attacks to the independence of the court system, constitutional revisions.
I will answer.
Okay.
But first,
Yes,
Georgios.
with
Yes.
Joaquin.
Well, Spain is a pro-European country since almost ever. At least the Democrats has always been pro-European. During the Franco regime, the democratic opposition met to avoid that a non-democratic Spain was admitted in the EU, but since the day number one after the democratic elections, everybody in the parliament, from the right to the Communist Party, all of us supported the EU membership and to be active in Europe. These feelings are no more utopian feelings, because we are there during the last 30 years. We know how the EU functions and what are the failures and the flaws of the EU, but Spain continues to be a very profound pro-European country. We are not Eurosceptics. And if I look around in the present composition of the parliament, there are some MPs Eurosceptic in Podemos. I don't know if all of them, but many MPs from Podemos are Eurosceptic, have been vocal in the past. Maybe some nationalists, radical nationalists, are not very pro-European, but nobody will dare to declare himself or herself anti-European, even Eurosceptic. In the negotiations between PSOE and Podemos to try to build an alternative coalition government, there were differences regarding the will to comply with the rules of budgetary discipline, for instance. Podemos people, they don't like to comply with the Stability and Growth Pact rules, and they said, we will impose the Europeans another kind of interpretation of the rules. But it's not serious. If you want to be in government, you can breach the rules, but not to declare that you want to breach the rules. So there are differences, but the main difference is not this one. The main difference is that they are populists and we are not populists. And I don't agree with our Polish friend how to deal with populism. I don't agree with this. You cannot fight against populism embracing all their messages but the democratic principles. No.
I didn't say
You need, no, more or less, you need to fight every populistic position. And you need to stick to your positions and to be able to explain why you think these positions are much better. And we are in a particular country. Every country is different. In Europe, this is one of the difficulties and one of the advantages of the European Union, unity in diversity. In Spain, we were the first European country to have a big terrorist attack from Islamic terrorists. Not by Islam, but by Islamic terrorists. Almost 200 people killed in 3 big explosions in 3 trains. There was no anti-Islamic reaction. And there is no anti-Islamic reaction in Spain. Why? Well, probably because the politicians, and not only my party leaders, but the politicians in Spain had the courage to avoid this. And this is very good, to have the courage to say, hey, don't put in the same basket one terrorist and one citizen because they have this religion, or they believe in these kind of things. No, I think we have to distinguish this. In the case of migration, we have a very good, positive example in Spain. We received, since the mid-90s until the beginning of the crisis, something like 12% of the total population in Spain as migrants, from Latin America, from Eastern Europe, from Muslim countries also. And there is no xenophobic, there are no xenophobic positions represented in the parliament. We are lucky. And this is Europe also. And in Europe, the leader of the Dutch xenophobic party, Wilders, was defeated recently in the elections. And even in France, that they have serious problems, and hopefully, I cross my fingers, they will have a decent result in the next elections. Well, Marine Le Pen has, according to the polls, 24% of the votes, and the other 76% are not following the Marine Le Pen positions. So let's look at the reality such as it is, and not such as the populist wants us to believe it is.
Georgios, what's your take on the way the left should address populism and Syriza in the case of Greece?
There are many people who like to think, to create parallelisms and analogies between, let's say, PASOK and Syriza. But times are entirely different, and this cannot happen. Why? PASOK came to power in 1981. It was only 7 years after the fall of the dictatorship of the colonels. And PASOK, in reality, what it did, it put an end to the civil war and to the undeclared civil war till then. What PASOK did, it brought into power the population that was politically and economically excluded till then. But PASOK, at the time, they had the money to spend in order to buy, let's say, the agreement of the people. I was at the time, I entered into the university as an assistant, let's say, professor in 1981. And in 1983, I saw my salary double. Can you imagine? So PASOK is mainly responsible for what has happened afterwards to our society. We started living above our means because of PASOK. And PASOK was a populist party in many aspects, a populist with a very strong leader. Of course, Tsipras is, he is a strong leader. He controls for the time being his party, but he does not have in reality, the quasi-absolute power that Papandreou had. And more importantly, Syriza has to deal with the crisis. Syriza has to manage the crisis. He doesn't have any money to spend to create now a political clientele. It's entirely different period. But I would like to add something. I had an idea when we were talking about, the problems of Poland, etc., and with the refugee issue. Now, what we see with the refugee issue is the errors committed by European Union and also the United States, well, what they wanted was to export democracy. And democracy, now we can see, cannot be exported. They tried to export democracy in the countries of the Comintern, of the East Bloc, and we see the problems now. And they also started to export democracy right after the Arab Spring or during the Arab Spring. We see this big, it has been a failure, 2 failures, and now we see the results. Because the consequences, we see them right now, here.
Stowamir, so is there a failure in the exportation of democracy to Poland?
Well, as you see, well, probably less than to Iraq. And we have some tradition of democracy, like, and I'm not gonna praise Polish tradition of democracy, but there is more than like in Iraq or in other countries. But like so first I would like to answer, I would like to react to what Joaquin said, and then to react what you said about the difference between Hungary and Poland, or Orban and Kaczynski. Like, listen, something happened that the left is more establishmental today and the right is more popular, isn't it? Like, traditionally, the left was closer to the people, more appealing to the people, actually was more populist. The populist, the genealogy of populist, should be actually easier for the left to accept. So I would, not only for the sake of discussion, say something that maybe, yeah, we should take something from populism. Maybe we should hear them, maybe we should understand them, because it's not really understandable why the 5 or 7 leaders of Socialist Party in France are ministers, worked in the Rothschild banks, and like all of them are extremely rich, and like they really they are not from the people, okay? In your presentation, you didn't say that Zapatero wanted to go third way. You didn't say that Zapatero was implementing many rules that used to be called neoliberal by people like Stiglitz, Piketty, and so on. And if you look what happened to the countries that implemented third way, beginning with Netherlands, because it actually began in Netherlands, 1994, and then Neue Mitte in Germany, and of course Tony Blair's government, but also Spanish government. In all of these countries, the reaction was the rise of populism. So I wouldn't be I wouldn't create my only answer to populism that we should reject them, reject their agenda, and that's it. There is a notion on the left, PASOKization. You know what it means? PASOKization means how to decrease from 45% to 4%. This is the PASOKization of the left. I'm sorry, but this is the truth. Okay? PASOK cannot enter the parliament. It can only do it inside the coalition, which would be a joke 15 years ago on the left side. Not only this, look what happened to Syriza. Syriza is a far-left country that realizes extreme right program, privatization, cuts of social transfers, and so on and so on. This is what happens to the left. So we really should maybe do something that would be more revolutionary than just to recall what was the good values of the left. But of course, my heart is on your side. But my eyes are like on populists, okay? I would do it, I would say it this way. To answer your question, because it's a very, very good point. The difference between Orban and Kaczynski is that whereas Orban is a pragmatic, Kaczynski is a cynic. Oh, differently. Orban is a cynic and Kaczynski is more like a fanatic or sociopath, like psychopath, someone really strange. The difference is between fanatic and cynic is that cynic, at the end of the day, is pragmatic. For a fanatic, pragmatism is a sign of weakness or treason, okay? If you hesitate, if you find a pragmatic solution, you should be expelled from my cloister or my army because you don't fit to the clear division of enemies and us. Okay, so this is so. And but the important thing also to observe is that that fanatic, differently than cynic, can commit suicide. Okay, and this is what happened to Kaczynski 2007. He won election 2005. In 2007, he lost because he attacked the coalitioner for fabricated reason. Okay, and he lost. Actually, this is what can happen today. This is what you observed in Brussels. There was no any reason to oppose Tusk. It was just it was the most stupid idea you can imagine. Okay, and he did it. It was against party interest, his own interest, Polish interest, Eastern European, Visegrad interest. Okay, there was no any pragmatic reason to do it. So still, actually, the biggest enemy for Kaczynski is Kaczynski himself.
So I'd like to take one last question. We started late, so we're going to go over by a few minutes. All right, so we're going to take two questions, very quick. Please keep them quick, and I'll give a chance to all our panelists to conclude, respond to each other, but again in a quick manner. So, sorry. About the right side. Okay. Yes. So, is there a question there? Yes. Please.
Actually, Andrzej Rzepliński is the former chief of the Constitutional Court that was the biggest enemy for Kaczynski and the first paralyzed institution in Poland. So his voice is very, very, very important, I think.
I'm professor of Warsaw University. I think that the topic of that panel is the future of the left. I think that there's no future because this is completely that concept as right as well, and also populism. The biggest populist in the history of mankind was Jesus Christ. I think that all of us could accept that he was, and he paid the price for that. When I read what he said many times, I cannot agree with him because he was so populist. What about the current leaders? We have no leaders. This is the problem. I don't know. This is the question for politologists. Why in the last 30 years there are not of course in any nation, in any state, a real leader. But when we discussing left or right, Merkel in Berlin is left or right, or Putin in Moscow is left or right, Abe in Tokyo, in Washington, Trump right now, and Zula in Pretoria, is he left or right? Even Tsipras in Athens. Really, I would have a problem to define him or to label him left or right or populist. He was doing the best in a situation created by his predecessors. And he played, I think, quite right role in this game with Angela Merkel. I think that his decisions were not populist, not left, not right. And even socialism is a dead term. Could you imagine a group of young, energetic, well-educated, 25, 30 years girls or boys who would create a political group or party or movement and call it socialist or social democratic. This is completely dead term because the left. What I mean, the left. Lenin was a left politician. and populist. And also in many decisions taken by Lenin and Stalin, very rightist decisions, when we define exactly and precisely the term right and left. So those terms have no power to define, to show us what can we do and what would be a result of left policy and right policy, especially right now during the informatic revolution and during the robotization. All of us want to have the best possible cars, yes, but we are against the robotization.
So I want to let our panelists provide an answer.
It is left or right? It is populist or not?
So what's your answer to this provocation? That's the there's what's left to the left. There's no future to the left. Please keep our.
I try to answer in general terms in my presentation and in some of my interventions after. I think the agenda is changing, of course, because the world is changing, the economy is changing, the social life conditions are changing, so the agenda is changing. But I think it's not difficult to distinguish a left agenda, not a leftist, a left agenda from the right agenda, or if you want to put it in other ways, a progressive agenda from a conservative agenda. I think it's easy to discuss. The elements of this agenda will be different than the ones were there 50 years ago or 30 years ago even. But and in any case, when I talk about these categories and this agenda, I talk of positions, platforms, and ideas coming from the democratic side. Some names mentioned by you that are not Democrats or were not at all Democrats are not included in my classification, of course. They are non-democrats, and this is another way, another thing. And the same as with the populist, there are populism in our world. There were populism before, it's not the first time. It's not the same than to become a popular politician. It's a completely different thing to be populist than to be popular. And you can be a populist leader from the right side, and there are many, unfortunately, and you can be a populist leader from the left side. There are few in our countries, we know some of them, but in other European countries, populist is only a question from the right side of the political spectrum. But I think we can discuss on all these things, but there are categories. The most important thing are the substance of our discussion. What to do if you are you feel from the left side, what you want to do? Reducing inequalities, fighting against climate change, accepting the fact that aging populations will not disappear from one day to another, that you need to increase our labor force if we want to sustain our welfare state. These are positions from the left. And these are very important questions to be discussed and continue to be discussed in our countries.
So, Georgios, what's the priority for the left?
Well, I think that we still don't have the analytical tools to speak about left and right. And I have also this sense that things have been very much confused. I prefer progressive and conservative, or open and closed. Again, you have the example of Greece. Imagine you have Syriza, that before arriving into power has been a radical left with a traditional concept, activist movement, and they have formed a coalition with an extremely conservative right-wing party, and the coalition works. The coalition works. So, how do you explain that? Is it a coalition of a left or a coalition of a right? No, it's a conservative coalition. Because even Tsipras, their ideal now is everything that comes from the past, the old state-driven economy, mainly, concerning the economic issues. And the rest of it, you know, the progressive agenda about separating, and that is the most important issue in Greece also, separating the church from the state. No, they don't even touch it. So we don't have still the analytical tools. But speaking about the progressive agenda, I would agree. These are the main topics. Climate change, inequalities, regulating the markets, and
Thank you.
thank you.
Stowamir, the word of the end is for you.
I would answer differently to Professor Rzepliński. Merkel is right, Putin is right, Abba is left, and Zula, I don't know. Actually, I think Professor Rzepliński a little bit illustrated of what I said at the beginning, that like it's a little bit confused to talk about those terms after 1989 in Poland, especially among elites who used to run Polish transition, like Professor Rzepliński. But I agree with Joaquin and Georgios that those terms are still important, that we have values on the left that are very different than on the right side. We can have some discussions about how we should react to populists. Should we learn something from them, or should we learn something from our losses with populists? And I still identify with both Georgios and Joaquin movement, and I hope you don't think that I'm just a populist. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks to our panelists for this very great debate.
Thank you.